Insane. Inside the prison, I was taken to a room in ward number 3. There were already 4 young occupants in the cell. We shared with each other our own stories of how we got drawn into the pro-democracy movement and how we got picked up, tortured, and thrown into jail. That night, the 5 of us barely had enough floor space to sleep. We made do with what we had, not to mention the toilet pan. The only piece of furnishing inside our cell was stinking up the place. The next morning, I was taken to an office within the prison. There, I saw Mamotu and Mawanta. As we were not allowed to speak, we gave each other a smile and a nod. Moments later, the 3 of us were taken to a building called the Special Ward. As the sign at the entrance read, Juvenile Ward, I figured the facility used to house underage inmates. I was placed in cell number 1. Mamotu and Mawanta were given cell number 6 and 8 respectively. Other cells were already occupied before we arrived. The meals offered at the special ward were decent by prison standards. I learned that the ward was reserved for those prisoners considered politically significant. Little did I know at the time that Mamotu, Mawanta, and I would be arrested and detained together again. 7 years later, in May 1996. It must have been my collective past life karma that brought the 3 of us such similar fate. After a week of my stay in so-called special ward, I was taken to ward number 2. I was not yet allowed to receive visitors or get in touch with my family. Technically, I had not been sentenced to prison. I was held under Article 10A of the State Protection Law. Hence, I was just a detainee, not a prisoner. The Article 10A detainees were allowed to receive a package from family once every 2 weeks. It had to be pre-approved by an intelligence officer assigned to the prison. As my family had not been informed of my whereabouts, there was no package for me to look forward to. I had arrived here in prison with nothing but the clothes on my back, the very same outfit I had been wearing since 20th July 1989. A fellow political prisoner who had been there longer kindly gave me a blanket. Some thoughtful inmates asked their family members to let my family know where I was being held. When I arrived in ward number 2, U Win Htein, the NLD co-founder, former chief editor of Hantawadi News, and Dorpayagale Aung's Red Prince were there. Tanzor and Niniu, the NLD youth members framed for bombing an oil refinery in early July, were also there. U Win Htein, Hantawadi, would later be moved to cell number 8 in the special ward. Somehow, I did not get to stay in the same ward for long. I was moved from ward to ward. I was placed in ward number 3, ward number 5. When I arrived in ward number 5, Dr. Tim Yowin, a surgeon and Dosu's personal physician, was there. Then I was placed back in ward number 2. The second time I arrived, all 60 cells of ward number 2 were occupied and even overcrowded. The rules call for each death row inmate to be placed in a separate cell. It was not the case here in ward number 2. During the 1988 pro-democracy uprising, there were cases of killings, beheadings, and wrongdoings by certain vengeful mobs. The alleged perpetrators, reportedly 108 in number, were arrested and sentenced to death. I remember writer Mountoka, ex-naval officer Major Bato, mentioning his intention to write a book about the death row inmates. Then I was placed again in the special ward, formerly juvenile ward. Before the entrance to the ward stood a one-story house with 3 bedrooms, a dining room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. During my time in prison, the intelligence officials were utilizing this small house as an interrogation facility. In the courtyard, diagonally across from the house, one could see a tiny stupa about 10 feet high. I somehow thought to myself that if this stupa were outside the prison, it would have been made taller and bigger. Straight across the yard from the stupa, there were 2 small newly built apartments, each housing 3 cells. Dr. Aung, a prominent NLD member, medical doctor and writer in sex education, would later be placed in one of these cells. Nearby, there were 7 single detached houses, or rather huts. The first time I was held in special ward, former intelligence chief, ex-Brigadier General Htein, better known as Eyeglasses Htein, not to be confused with the NLD co-founder U Htein, formerly known as General Dura Htein, and former Home Minister ex-Colonel Boni were present in those huts. They were both released before the end of 1989. At a later stage, for varied periods, 4 of the 7 huts would house rather solitarily confined in the 4 senior members of the NLD, all former military servicemen: U Htein, lawyer and formerly General Dura Htein, U Jimao, ex-colonel, U Htein, ex-lieutenant colonel, and U Shui, ex-colonel, not to be confused with another NLD elder U Aung, ex-brigadier general and ex-ambassador. At the special ward, there was a notable foreign inmate, Captain Kam Min-cho, a North Korean agent serving a life sentence for his role in the 9 October 1983 detonation of Rangoon's Martyrs Mausoleum, housing the tombs of our 9 national heroes, including Dosu's father. A few days after the explosion, a group of villagers outside of Rangoon spotted and attempted to apprehend him. Resisting their capture, he pulled out a hand grenade, which blew up in his hand. Some villagers were injured, and Captain Kang lost his right forearm below the elbow down. By the time I was detained in the special ward, the North Korean assassin had already become a devout Buddhist. He also spent time teaching Taekwondo to some prison staff. I later learned that he died of some illness in 2008. During my second stint at the special ward, I was placed in a cell block comprising 10 cells. Each cell was about 12 feet by 14 feet. The presence of a water faucet, an earthen barrel, and a poor flush toilet inside the cell meant that the inmate was not expected to go outside for his or her sanitary needs. In front of the cell, there was a tiny concrete yard about 5 square feet. At the entrance, there was a wooden door hinged to a brick wall. Every time Eyeglasses U Htein, former intelligence chief, and U Boni, ex-home minister, were let out of their single detached heads to receive visitors, the prison guards would come and close our cell doors to prevent us from catching a glimpse of the 2 VIP inmates. I was placed in cell number 1, student leader Min Htein occupied cell number 3, and cell number 2 was kept vacant. Separated by a cell between us, he and I had to talk to each other by yelling. Intelligence personnel eavesdropped on our daily conversations and reported to their higher-ups. I intuitively knew that I would be held captive for a long time and that I must take care of my physical and mental health. Indeed, I ended up having to stay in cell number 1 for about 5 years. Every morning and evening, I tried to get some exercise by walking back and forth inside my cell. Every day I took 8,000 to 10,000 footsteps and did some push-ups, sit-ups, and squats. 3 times a day I meditated, and every Uposatha, the Buddhist Sabbath, I kept the 8 precepts. At my request, the prison staff would let me know the dates of Uposatha. To cope with the solitary confinement, I tried to always occupy my mind with something: meditation, chanting gathas and sutras, or keeping mindful of whatever I was doing. Sometimes at night, I tried to recollect my English vocabulary, arranging words in alphabetical order. Creating my own concise dictionary in my head really helped me to fall asleep. Sometimes in the evening, whenever I was in the mood for a song, I sang aloud. If my jailmate Min Htein had not heard me sing for some nights, he would yell out to me, asking me to sing. He also knew a lot of songs, but often sang out of tune. As an Article 10A detainee, I started receiving a package from my family every 2 weeks. Min Htein too received packages from his family regularly. They usually contained food and other permitted items. The inmates usually exchanged food with each other. Po U, as I familiarly addressed Min Htein by his birth name, and I started exchanging messages and notes by hiding them in food packets. You may wonder how we could write messages without any stationery available to us. We were not even allowed any reading materials, let alone pen and paper. As necessity is the mother of invention, we created some writing instruments. We did not discard the plastic bags in which we received food. We thoroughly washed the bags with soap and dried them. Then we ripped them along the folding crease. Voila! We got plastic sheets or our own version of paper. We somehow got our hands on any pointed tip like a nail or a screw, which we then used as a writing stylus or a make-do pen. In order to do readable, each written sheet had to be held up against the light. We folded a written sheet into a tiny piece, then wrapped it up with another plastic sheet and buried it in the food. We bagged the food and pleaded with the prison staff to take it to another cell. That was how Min Htein and I exchanged messages that we did not want the prison staff to hear. We might have written about 100 plastic sheets each. After some time, they suspected something was going on, but did not give us a hard time. I just said we weren't allowed any reading materials. In fact, we were made to read 2 books at one point. To us, they were known as the Red Book and the Green Book. The Red Book was the military regime's propaganda against the so-called agents and underground network activities of the Communist Party of Burma, CPP. The Green Book was propaganda against the non-CPP forces behind the 1988 uprising, with the names of prominent personalities and their alleged activities listed. The regime tried to circulate many copies of both books, designed to misinform the public about the pro-democracy movement that obviously gained momentum in August 1988. There was an MI unit deployed inside the prison to monitor political prisoners, especially those in the special ward. The main functions of those agents were to interrogate us, solve problems if any, and gather as much information as possible. I spent the last half of 1989 in prison. We were now in the year 1990. In my opinion, staying in the special ward or any other wards made no difference to us. While the cells housing those convicted of real crimes were furnished with wooden flooring, we, the political prisoners, had to sleep on very cold concrete floors. The cold emitted from the concrete flooring was a slow and silent killer. I know someone who died in prison of ill health after 6 or 7 years of having to sleep on a thin straw mat on a very cold concrete floor. The poor soul was U Htein from the town of Monua in Sagaing Division. He was a writer, lawyer, and member of NLD group of intellectuals. He passed away in his solitary confinement in insane prison in 8 June 1997. Even if the cold floor did not kill you, it could still seriously damage your health. To insulate myself from the cold, I would fold my blanket into more layers to place it atop my straw mat. To curb any ill feelings that I might have harbored against our captors, I continued my spiritual routine, sending out my mitta to all beings, including those who had wronged us. During my time in the special ward, I did not have anyone to talk to except Min Htein. Now that we were in 1990, when we talked, or I should say yelled to each other, it was mostly about the upcoming elections. The first ever multi-party elections since 1960 were scheduled for 27 May 1990. I told my jailmate that I considered the situation worrisome and foresaw problems because, number one, most political dissidents were still in prison. Number two, a series of martial law conditions imposed since 1988 were still in effect. And number three, worst of all, the NLD party leaders U Htein and Dorsu were still in detention. About a week or so before the elections, Zagana and Aung were brought into our special ward. Aung, meaning the wild one, and Zagana, meaning tweezers, were arguably Burma's most popular comedians at the time. Tweezer is the stage name of Dr. Thura, a trained dentist but a practicing satirist. His mother was a candidate for Yangon Township and campaigning for her election. While the two comedians were in attendance at one of her campaign events, the crowd demanded that they speak on stage. They obliged. There was a ridiculous campaign rule in effect that the agenda and all speakers of each event would have to be pre-approved by relevant authorities. No impromptu public talks were permitted. So, the pair got arrested for speaking without prior approval. The wild one was placed in the cell between Min Htein's and mine. Tweezers was placed in the cell next to that of U Min. At the time, I asked myself, if the military authorities are really serious about holding a free and fair election, why would they jail these two comedians? Every day, the comedy duo would entertain us by joking around or singing aloud. With a voice carrying far and wide, Tweezers would sing every night. He did not need a microphone to amplify his voice. The entire ward could hear him. A prison guard would come in and to stop him from singing. They would then get into a heated argument that would become a nightly affair. First thing every day, I would shout, "Good morning," to my neighbor, the wild one. He would shout back with all kinds of funny jokes. The two of them did not last long in the special ward. No, they were not released. They were just taken away from us and moved elsewhere within insane prison. Currently, Treaser is a film actor and director, and the wild one also is a film actor.